It was a nice summer day. A 5-year-old boy named James was playing outside in the backyard of his suburban home as his mother was fixing up the kitchen. James has always been a quiet boy. He plays by himself mostly. He never had many friends, but he always had a wild imagination. James's mother was in the kitchen feeding their dog Fido when she heard what sounded like James talking to someone in the backyard. She wasn't sure who it was he could be talking to. Could he have finally made a friend? She thought. Being a single mom, it's hard for her to always keep an eye on her son, so she decided to go outside and check on him. When she went into the backyard, she was a bit confused because James was the only person back there. Was he talking to himself? She thought.
I could have sworn I heard another voice. James, it's time to come inside.
She called out to him. He came inside and sat down at the kitchen table. It was about lunchtime, so she decided to make him a turkey sandwich.
James, who are you talking to out there?
His mother asked. James looked up for a moment.
I was playing with my new friend,
he said, smiling. His mother poured him some milk and continued to pry, as any good mother would.
Does your friend have a name? Why didn't you ask him to have lunch with us?
His mother asked. James stared at his mother for a moment before replying.
His name is Laughing Jack.
His mother was a bit taken back by what he had said.
Oh, what does your friend look like?
She asked, while feeling a bit confused.
He's a clown. He has long hair and a big swirly cone nose. He's got long arms and baggy pants with stripy socks, and he always smiles.
She then realized her son was talking about an imaginary friend. She thought maybe it was normal for kids his age to have imaginary friends, especially when he has no real kids to play with. It's probably just a phase, she thought. The rest of the day went by as per usual, and it was starting to get late. So she put James to bed. She tucked him in, gave him a kiss, and made sure she turned on his nightlight before she closed the door. She was feeling pretty tired herself, so she decided to go to bed not long after. Later that night, she had an awful nightmare. It was dark. She was in some kind of rundown amusement park. She was scared, running through the endless field of empty tents, broken down rides, and abandoned game huts. The whole place had a horrible look to it. Everything was black and white. The prized stuffed animals all hung from nooses in the game huts, all with sick grins stitched on their faces. It felt like the whole park was looking at her, even though there wasn't another living thing in sight. Then suddenly, she began to hear music play. The sounds of Pop Goes the Weasel being played on a squeeze box echoed through the park. It was hypnotizing. She followed its tune to a huge circus tent nearby, almost in a trance, unable to stop her legs from moving forward. It was pitch black. The only light came from a single spotlight shining on the center of the big top of the tent. As she walked towards the light, the music slowed down. She found herself singing along, unable to stop. All around the mulberry bush, the monkey chased the weasel. The monkey thought toss all in fun. The music stopped right before its climax, and suddenly the light shot on. The intensity of the lights was practically blinding. All she could see was a small dark silhouette shuffle towards her. Then another one appeared, and another, and another. There were dozens of them, all coming toward her. She couldn't move. Her legs were frozen. All she could do was watch as the haunting figures drew nearer. As they got closer, she could see they were all children. As she looked at each one, she noticed they were all horribly disfigured and mutilated. Some had cuts all over their body, others were severely burnt, and others were missing limbs, even eyes. The children engulfed her, clawing at her flesh, dragging her to the ground, and tearing inside her. As the children tore her apart, and she faded away, all she could hear was laughter. Horrible, awful, evil laughter. She woke up the next morning in a cold sweat. After taking a few deep breaths, she looked over and saw that a few of James's action figures were positioned facing her on top of her nightstand. She sighed. James had probably woken up early and put these here. She gathered up the toys and made her way to James's room. However, when she opened the door, James was sound asleep. She just shrugged and placed the toys back into James's toy box and headed out to the living room. A little while later, James woke up and she made him his breakfast. He was quiet and seemed a bit groggy. Perhaps he didn't sleep well either. She decided to ask him about the toys.
James, honey, did you put your toys in Mommy's bedroom this morning?
His eyes shot up at her for a moment, then quickly glanced back down at his cereal.
Laughing Jack did it.
James answered without making any eye contact with his mother. She rolled her eyes and responded,
Well, tell Laughing Jack to keep your toys in your room.
James nodded and finished up his breakfast, then decided to go play out in the backyard. She went to relax in the living room, and she must have dozed off, because she woke up a couple of hours later.
Shit, I need to go check on James,
she said. As she snapped out of her nap, she was a bit worried. It had been over 2 hours, and she hadn't checked on him. She stepped out in the backyard, but James wasn't there anymore. She was getting nervous, so she called out to him.
James! James, where are you?
Just then, she heard a giggle come from the front yard. She rushed through the gate around to the front of the house. James was sitting on the sidewalk. She breathed a sigh of relief and walked over to him.
James, how many times have I told you to stay in the...
She paused as she noticed that James was chewing on something.
James, what are you eating?
She asked. James looked up at her, then reached into his pocket and pulled out a handful of hard candies in all colors. This made his mother very nervous.
James, who gave you that candy?
His mother asked, feeling worried. James just stared at her, not speaking.
James, please tell Mommy where you got that candy.
She begged him as she crouched down towards him. James hung his head down and said,
Laughing Jack gave it to me.
Her heart sank. She kneeled down closer to look him in the eyes.
James, I've had enough of this damn Laughing Jack thing. He is not real. And this is a very serious situation, and I need to know who gave you the candy.
She could see her son's eyes tear up.
But Mama, Laughing Jack did give me the candy.
She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. James has never lied to his mom, but what he was telling her is impossible. She made him spit out the candy, and she threw the rest of it away. James appeared to be fine. Maybe she was just overreacting. After all, he could have had gotten it from Tom and Linda from next door, or Mr. Walker down the street. Either way, she is going to have to keep a closer eye on James, she told herself. That night, she put James to bed as usual and decided to go to bed early herself. Suddenly, she was woken up by a loud bang coming from the kitchen. She sprung out of bed and hurried downstairs. When she got to the kitchen, she was horrified. Everything on the counters had been thrown on the floor, and their dog Fido hung dead from the light fixture. His stomach was cut open and stuffed with candy, the same type that James was eating earlier that day. Her shock was quickly broken by a sharp scream coming from James's room, followed by loud crashes. She quickly grabbed a knife from out the drawer and moved up the stairs with a speed that only a mother whose child is in danger could have. She burst through the door and flicked on the lights. Everything in the room was knocked over and tossed on the floor. Her poor son in his bed, crying and shaking with fear, a pool of urine staining the sheets. She scooped up her child and ran out of the house and went next door to Tom and Linda's house. Luckily, they were still awake. They let her use their phone and she called the police. It didn't take them long to arrive, and she explained what had happened. They looked at her as if she were crazy. They searched the house, but all they found was a dead dog in 2 trashed rooms. The officer told her that someone had probably gotten into the house and done this right before making a quick escape when they heard her coming up the stairs. She knew it wasn't true. All the doors were locked and none of the windows were open. Whatever was in her house didn't come from outside. The next day, James stayed inside. She didn't want him to leave her sight. She went into the garage and found his old baby monitor and set it up in his room. If anything was going to come into his room tonight, she was going to be able to hear it. She went to the kitchen and grabbed the largest knife from the drawer and put it on her nightstand. Imaginary friend or not, she was not letting anything hurt her little boy. Soon enough, night came. She put James to bed. He was afraid, but she promised him that she wasn't going to let anything happen to him. She tucked him in, gave him a kiss, and turned on his nightlight. Before closing the door, she whispered to him,
"Good night, James. I love you."
She tried to stay up as long as she could, but after a few hours, she felt herself drifting off. My baby would be safe for the night, she thought to herself. Just as she laid her head on her pillow, she heard a soft noise come from the baby monitor she had put on her nightstand. At first, it sounded like interference, like the kind a radio would make. Then it turned into a soft moan. Was James asleep? She thought. And then she heard it, the laugh from her nightmare. That horrible laugh. She sprung up from bed and grabbed the knife from under her pillow. She rushed over to James's room and creaked the door open. She tried the light switch, but it wouldn't come on. She took a step in, and she could feel the warm, thick liquid on her feet. Suddenly, James's nightlight came on, and she could see the absolute horror laid out in front of her. James's body was nailed up on the wall, the nails piercing through his hands and feet. His chest was cut wide open, and his organs hung down to the floor. His eyes and tongue had been removed, along with most of his teeth. She was disgusted. She could hardly believe this was her baby boy. Then she heard it again, the soft, desperate moan. James was still alive. My poor baby boy, in so much pain, clinging to life. She thought to herself as she panicked. She ran across the room and vomited on the floor. But her sickness was interrupted by a horrible cackle that came from behind her. She spun around while still wiping bile from her mouth. Then, out of the shadows emerged the friend responsible for all this horror, Laughing Jack. His ghost white skin and matted black hair hung down to his shoulders. He had piercing white eyes surrounded by dark black rings. His twisted smile revealed a row of sharp jagged teeth, and his skin didn't look like skin at all. It almost looked like rubber or plastic. He wore a patchy clown outfit with striped sleeves and socks. His body itself was grotesque, his long arms hanging down past his waist, and the way he was positioned made him look almost boneless, like a rag doll. He let out a sickening laugh as to let her know that he was pleased with her reaction of his work. He then turned around slowly in front of James and began to laugh even more at the horrific sight he has laid out. That was enough to shake James's mom from her terror. She snapped,
Get away from him, you bastard!
She rushed at the monster, raising the knife above her head, and stabbed down at him. But as soon as the knife touched him, he disappeared in a cloud of black smoke. The knife passed right through and pierced James' still beating heart, splashing the warm blood on his mother's face.
Oh no! What have I done? I killed my baby! I killed my poor little baby! Oh, James, I'm so sorry. James! No!
She cried out in horror. She immediately fell to her knees, and she could hear sirens in the distance growing louder.
My boy. My sweet little boy. I promised Mommy was supposed to protect you. But I failed. I'm sorry, James. I'm so sorry.
She said as she sobbed. Police soon arrived to find her in front of her son still wielding the knife covered in her baby's blood. The trial was short, insanity. She was placed in a house for the criminally insane, where she had been for the past 2 months. She sat at a table looking out a window, talking to herself.
It's not so bad here. The only reason I'm awake now is because someone is playing Pop Goes the Weasel outside my window. I'll talk to the orderlies about it in the morning.